House Foreign Affairs Committee Republicans have issued a warning about ISIS and al-Qaeda rebuilding in Afghanistan since U.S. troops pulled out of the embattled country last year. To chat about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert and one of our regular contributors, Lisa Daftari, joining us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, the committee's report discussed the many connections between the ruling Taliban and al-Qaeda.
Right. It's only been 1 year, 365 days. And look at what developments have already come up out of the Afghanistan that we withdrew from, leaving weapons and assets and the entire country in the hands of the Taliban. Now, what we did not anticipate is that it's going to grow into a terror cell worse than the way we found it 20 years ago when the United States went in with allied forces to fight in the aftermath of 9/11 to look for Al Qaeda. Now, not only did they find Al Qaeda, obviously, Zawahiri, the leader and mastermind of Al Qaeda, was hiding in plain sight in Afghanistan. But now officials are warning that it will become a hub, not just for Al Qaeda, but also for ISIS-K. Why wouldn't it? I mean, look, the country is being run by the Taliban, a terror group in and of itself, right? So why wouldn't it sublease, so to speak, its dirty work and its territories to other terror groups? The calculation that the West has always made is that these terror groups are in competition. They're in competition for funding, for terror attacks, to claim terror attacks. And while that might be true on a certain scale, on the macro scale, they would much rather be united against the West. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. And again, 365 days in, women are not going to school. Women are not allowed to leave their homes without a male chaperone. We have extreme poverty. There is a shortage of everything in the country, and including electrical power, which is making it very difficult for them to have air conditioning and clean water and all the things that we take for granted here, obviously in the West. But again, the country moving backwards after 20 years of the United States being there and trying to get rid of this terror influence. It not only has come back, but it looks like it will exponentially grow in the next 20 years.
So with the reconstitutions of some of these terrorist groups, does that mean we can expect more potential attacks and threats here in the West?
Right. And what's scary is that when you look at a terror group like Al Qaeda versus an ISIS is more like a do it yourself kind of terror group. What they would encourage is if you have a kitchen knife, if you have an axe, if you have a hammer, if you have a car, you could ram it into two people. And even if you kill two people, you still are considered a martyr. Al Qaeda is the grandpa of terrorism. And what they like is these big, grandiose gestures of terrorism. So you have like a 9/11 type of attack. So what we might see now is both the smaller types of attacks all throughout Europe and the United States and getting into the West because our borders are porous and we're not vetting anybody, as well as perhaps retreating on the part of ISIS, on the part of Al Qaeda rather, having a safe haven like Afghanistan and being able to launch a larger scale attack to really put its stamp and really get back in there. Again, relevancy is very important to these terror groups. So Al Qaeda, it's been a while before since they have been able to claim an attack like 9/11. So that's probably what we'll see more of, both the large scale and the small scale attacks. But I hope I'm wrong.
Now, speaking of which, a bus packed with Israelis traveling in Samaria was attacked by suspected Palestinian terrorists on Saturday night. What can you tell us at this point?
They were women. Look at this. This is amazing because in the same week you had reports coming out that the head of Israeli intelligence bodies are now all women across the board. They have risen in the ranks, and now they are women across the board. And now juxtapose that with you have terrorists that are being groomed, women that are being groomed as terrorists to carry out these attacks. It was a bus packed with obviously Israelis in Samaria. Samaria and Judea are the contested, what they call occupied, what the Jews call from the Bible. It is their claim to the land, part of Israel. And these three women tried to start shooting at the bus. We've seen an evolution in terrorism on the part of the Palestinians, and we can thank the Iranian regime regime for supplying them and other terror organizations, but mainly the Iran regime. But now they're shooting with guns, and that's what makes it very, very dangerous. We've seen this throughout the country in Israel as well. People in bars and people going to the supermarket and people on the street and people at the mall being shot out with guns. Imagine you are going about your business, you're a civilian, you're walking to school, you are going to the pizza shop, you're going to the mall, and you're being shot at. You're not even paying attention.
Wow.
So it is very dangerous. I guess they've moved away or at least started to maybe diversify their terror portfolio, but maybe moving away from suicide bombings. Maybe they don't have as many recruits for that right now. But again, when you look at those school videos, 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds singing songs like "I want to blow myself up to kill the Israelis and kill the Jews," well, they may have new recruits coming up very soon.
But fortunately, no casualties. So I guess maybe that was some of the good news regarding that bus attack.
Yes, it was foiled.
Lisa, Iran has dropped its demand to have the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps removed from the U.S. list of terrorist organizations as an apparent precondition for reviving the 2015 nuclear deal. Why the change of heart from the Islamic Republic?
Because the U.S. wasn't moving on this. What's interesting is that it was even entertained for the amount of time that it was entertained. So let me back up a bit. So the Revolutionary Guard is the paramilitary arm. It is the most horrendously vicious and brutal arm of the Iran regime's military apparatus, and that should tell you a lot about how barbaric they are and how they operate. They have assets not only in Iran, and they go against the peaceful protesters and they kill the peaceful protesters, but they have assets in Syria and Lebanon and elsewhere where they have their terror proxies. And so you have the United States, well, the Iran regime put this on the table and said, we want them removed from the terror list. And the United States said, let's consider this. Obviously, there was a lot of opposition to this, and people like myself wrote about it and said, there's no way that they should be removed. They are absolute terrorists, and they continue to do dirty work. Even while we're at the negotiating table, they're not showing any change in behavior. So why would we remove them and make it a national security risk for ourselves by doing so, and a global risk, frankly? So now that has been basically, it was a point of contention, and the Iran deal wasn't moving forward. So the Iranian regime decided to say, okay, we'll pass on this one demand that we're making, and perhaps we can move forward. So the bottom line here is that we're moving closer and closer to an Iran nuclear deal, which is absolutely mind-boggling, since we're seeing the Iran regime in its worst behavior ever when it comes to proliferation and uranium enrichment and spreading its terrorism throughout the region by supporting its proxies and cracking down on human rights and making obviously human rights violations at home. So again, no change in behavior, but they may at the end of the day get the deal.
There are reports that the EU Commission is promoting an Islamic youth group with alleged ties to the European arm of the Muslim Brotherhood. Explain why this may be of concern.
Yeah, it's crazy because if there aren't people out there connecting the dots, it's like these government bodies don't really realize what they're doing and how to basically move away from extremism. And I see that, and I don't think that it's by design. I don't want to believe that it is, but perhaps there is a soft spot in the European Union's hearts for certain terror groups or certain level of extremism, because that's what they're used to. If there's any global lesson to be learned from the Europeans, it's their remorse for allowing the influence of extremism into their countries by having such lax migration policies in the aftermath of the Arab Spring and the 2014 march of ISIS into Syria and Iraq, and thereby getting a big flood of migrants without any vetting into their countries, and now having to deal with this extremism within their country. So now they are trying to support youth groups and to support different types of humanitarian or causes. And of course, this one has been flagged as having ties with the Muslim Brotherhood. It is not surprising at all. It's actually surprising that it's been flagged and that it's a headline, but it hasn't, it's not surprising because it happens. It happens in the United States. It happens in Europe. And it's because these terror groups have learned how to normalize themselves. They've learned how to embed themselves in government, in Congress, within these humanitarian organizations. We had Human Rights Watch, which is a humanitarian body that is completely anti-Semitic. And when you look at their actual content and their leaders and what they're spewing, it's completely extreme and it's completely anti-Semitic. But no one really. It's become normalized, is what I'm trying to say. And I think that is partially because of the PR movement by these terror groups to say we can't be extreme anymore. We have to tone it down a bit and embed ourselves, kind of Trojan horse ourselves into normal society. And this is the result.
Lisa, Russia's defense ministry accused Ukraine on Saturday of allegedly poisoning some of its servicemen in the southeastern part of the country in late July. Now, Ukrainian officials shot back by saying, no, the alleged poisoning could have been caused by Russian forces eating expired canned meat. So what was it?
Yeah, it's a funny story. I say funny. I mean, obviously the loss of life is never funny, but if you remember, this was a story about Ukrainian forces making cake. And I don't even know if it was Ukrainian forces or Ukrainian grannies making poisoned cake and then serving it to the Russians. And then they basically died from the poisoning. And obviously this story was flagged by the Russians and they accused the Ukrainians. But what's crazy is that they even are pointing fingers. I mean, they're here invading a country, killing innocent civilians, and now they're pointing fingers at the casualties that were caused. It's part of war, and it's an interesting story because it's innovative, and we see a lot of innovation out of the Ukrainians who are truly trying to hold on to whatever they can hold on to, but it looks like their chances are becoming less and less.
Former NBA star Dennis Rodman is apparently going to Russia. He says he's planning to push for the release of WNBA player Brittany Griner, who was sentenced to 9 years in jail for drug possession.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Dennis Rodman certainly has his way with rogue dictators. We've seen that in the past. So now he says he has permission to go to Russia. Look, in the middle of a war, we haven't been able to negotiate the American hostages. I mean, they're prisoners, but they're basically hostages in this current political dilemma. And Dennis Rodman thinks he's the man to do it. So he said, "I'm going to go get that girl." It's an exact quote, and he's planning on traveling there next week and seeing how or what he can do. It would be a very interesting twist on things if Dennis Rodman is the guy to get this job done. It would be wonderful if he can get her out, and hopefully maybe she's going to be more pro-American once she gets out. We'll see about that. But there's so many different little side stories with this. But she wasn't sentenced to 9 years. The maximum for drug possession is 10 years. She got 9. So that just is a little glimpse into what Russia's thinking right now in giving or serving such a harsh sentence for such a petty crime, in trying to obviously get back at the United States for the sanctions placed on Russia, which are extremely cumbersome, and they are feeling the effects.
Lisa, facility overcrowding is causing U.S. Border Patrol to suspend routine patrols. Now, a number of migrants trying to cross Mexico into Texas came all the way from Nicaragua.
Yes, and that's that. I mean, they are on a mission because they know that their time is limited. During the Biden administration, the borders are open. Some places across the border are getting up to 500 or more migrants per day. There are stories about them lining up at hospitals in New York City because they're being bused there from places like Texas. The governor there being fed up. They're just not able to absorb the sheer number. Now, put aside the vetting and the disease and the fentanyl coming through the border, the human trafficking, the sex trafficking, the drug trafficking. So obviously a lot of awful side effects, but really the logistics of it is that they're not able to absorb these sheer numbers. There have been talks about completing certain parts of the border in places like Arizona and Texas, where they again are just, it's a crisis. It's a true crisis. And as you said, they're from places like Nicaragua. Now the law, especially with minors, is that they cannot be sent back if they're not from an adjacent country. So if they're from Canada or Mexico, they can be sent back, but when they're from places like Nicaragua, we have to take them in. And knowing that, we're seeing a lot of minors coming over. I mean, taking advantage of these laws, and we're seeing the effects of it. We're truly not able to absorb these numbers, and as you can see by this story, is that Border Patrol has basically given up because the apparatus doesn't work.
She's our foreign affairs expert and one of our regular contributors. Lisa Daftari, thanks again for joining us from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.